All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are cracking open a case that's been debated for centuries, an interpretive puzzle that really hinges on just a few words. Welcome to the case of the contested verse. And this is it. This is the sentence right at the heart of our investigation. It's from the New Testament book of 1 Timothy, and for generations, it has had a massive impact on the roles of women in so many church traditions. And you really can't overstate its influence. It's been the bedrock for church rules, a major source of controversy, and the subject of what feels like endless scholarly examination. The historical weight here is just immense. So, all of that debate, all of that history, it really boils down to this one critical question. Was this command meant for every Christian, everywhere, for all time? Or was it a specific instruction for a specific problem happening in one particular church? That question is going to frame our entire investigation. To even begin to find an answer, we have to start with the scene of the crime, so to speak, the historical context. Our first clue takes us to ancient Ephesus, and what we find is a church right in the middle of a serious crisis. You see, this letter to Timothy wasn't written in a vacuum. The very first chapter tells us exactly why it was sent, to command, and I quote, certain persons not to teach any different doctrine. So the central issue, right from the get-go, was a disruption in teaching. And these false teachers, they had a specific strategy. This passage, from a letter written around the same time, paints a pretty vivid picture. They were literally creeping into homes and specifically targeting and influencing women, leading them astray with all sorts of twisted ideas. So here's the crucial point. This command about women teaching wasn't given to some healthy, stable community. It was given to a church in turmoil, where false ideas were spreading like wildfire, especially through some of the women who had been deceived. That context, it's a vital clue. Okay, let's move to our next piece of evidence. And this one is a lexical mystery. It all comes down to a single, incredibly unusual Greek word. The word is authentein. Now, what makes this word so mysterious is just how rare it is. It shows up exactly one time in the entire New Testament, right here in this verse. And because we have no other examples to compare it to, pinning down its exact meaning is incredibly difficult. Now, that rarity creates a huge problem for translators. Does authentein just mean to exercise authority in a neutral general sense? Or does it have a negative spin, something more like to usurp authority, to seize it improperly or to dominate? The implications of that difference are absolutely massive. And that's the question at the very heart of this lexical debate. Was the author prohibiting women from holding any and all legitimate teaching roles, or was he prohibiting a very specific, domineering, or illegitimate power grab that was happening in that Ephesian church? The answer changes everything. This leads us to our next area of investigation, because we've got evidence from other parts of the scriptures that seems to tell a totally different story. Let's look at the broader biblical witness. I mean, if 1 Timothy 2:12 is a blanket ban for all time, these other passages become a real head-scratcher. You've got Phoebe, a deacon in the church. You've got Priscilla, who, along with her husband, actually taught a prominent male preacher named Apollos. You have women prophesying in church services, and the Apostle Paul repeatedly calls women his fellow workers in ministry. So you see the tension, right? These examples of women actively teaching, leading, and speaking in the early church, they create a pretty significant conflict with the idea that this one verse was meant to silence all women in all churches forever. And this tension is exactly why this debate is still so alive today. So why? Why did Paul give this command in the first place? Well, he actually provides his reasoning, and he roots it in the story of Adam and Eve. Let's see how this clue builds our case. Okay, so there are basically two ways to read his argument. The first is what you could call an argument from hierarchy. Adam was created first, therefore men have authority over women, period. But there's a second way to read it, and that focuses on deception. Eve was the one who was deceived by the serpent's false teaching, making her a perfect cautionary tale for what was happening in Ephesus. And that simple shift changes the entire focus. If the argument is about who was deceived first, then Paul isn't trying to establish a permanent gender hierarchy at all. Instead, he's using Eve as a powerful example of what happens when someone is misled by false teaching and then tries to teach others. And that connects directly back to the crisis in Ephesus. So, what's the verdict? After looking at the context, the vocabulary, and all this conflicting evidence, why is this debate still raging? let's quickly summarize why this case, for all intents and purposes, remains open. It really comes down to these three key factors. First, you have an incredibly rare Greek word, often tain, and we're just not 100% sure what it means. Second, you have a very specific historical context, a church in total crisis. And third, you've got this undeniable tension with other parts of the Bible that show women in active ministry. When you put all of those factors together, they make a simple black and white answer almost impossible. Any interpretation has to wrestle with all this complexity, which is exactly why so many smart, faithful people remain divided on it. Understanding why it's so complex is the first step to navigating the conversation today. And this really gets to the heart of what it means to interpret a text responsibly, what scholars call exegesis. The source material for this explainer really drives home the point that a text this complex requires humility. It requires a willingness to admit that there is genuine ambiguity here, and that being dogmatic can actually be pretty dangerous. And that leaves us with a final, bigger question. When we come across ancient writings, biblical or otherwise, that are just packed with historical and linguistic knots, what's our responsibility? Maybe, just maybe, the goal isn't always about finding a simple, easy answer, but about learning how to ask better, more informed questions.